June 15, 1752, 10:30 p.m., the outskirts of Philadelphia. A violent thunderstorm rages across the Pennsylvania countryside as a 46-year-old man stands in an open field, rain soaking through his woolen coat, watching the lightning flash overhead with the intense concentration of a natural philosopher seeking to unlock the secrets of creation itself. Benjamin Franklin grips the wet hemp string of a large silk kite, a metal key dangling from the line just above his knuckles, as electrical charge builds in the storm clouds above. Most rational men would seek shelter from such a tempest, but Franklin deliberately positions himself to become a conduit for the very force that could kill him instantly. As a bolt of lightning strikes nearby, electrical current surges down the kite string, causing the key to spark and jump with blue fire. In this moment of triumph and terror, Franklin proves that lightning and laboratory electricity are the same phenomenon, revolutionizing humanity's understanding of the natural world and establishing his reputation as one of the greatest scientific minds of the age. Yet this daring experiment represents only one facet of a man whose achievements would span science, diplomacy, literature, invention, and statecraft, making him perhaps the most complete genius America has ever produced. The bloodline that created this extraordinary polymath reaches back through generations of English yeoman farmers and skilled craftsmen, whose perseverance and practical wisdom would profoundly shape Franklin's character and worldview. His great-great-great-grandfather, Thomas Franklin, was born around 1540 in the village of Ecton in Northamptonshire, during the tumultuous reign of Henry VIII, when England was breaking away from papal authority and establishing its own religious identity. Thomas lived through the brief Catholic Restoration under Queen Mary I, when Protestant reformers were burned at the stake, and witnessed the Elizabethan settlement that would define English Christianity for centuries to come. As a blacksmith in a small rural community, Thomas represented the backbone of English society, skilled artisans whose labor sustained the agricultural economy, while their Protestant faith supported resistance to both Catholic tradition and aristocratic privilege. Thomas's son, Henry Franklin, born around 1573, came of age during the golden years of Elizabeth I's reign, when English privateers like Francis Drake were challenging Spanish dominance of the seas, and playwrights like William Shakespeare were creating immortal works of literature. Henry witnessed the failed Spanish Armada of 1588, which secured England's independence and began its transformation into a major naval power. As a blacksmith like his father, Henry served the farming community of Ecton during a period of agricultural innovation and population growth that was gradually transforming English society from medieval feudalism toward early capitalism. His marriage around 1595 to a local woman whose name has been lost to history produced several children who would carry the Franklin name into the next century. The early 1600s brought Henry's son, also named Thomas Franklin, born around 1598, who would witness some of the most dramatic events in English history. This Thomas lived through the Gunpowder Plot of 1605, when Catholic conspirators attempted to blow up Parliament and King James' asserts, and saw the establishment of the first permanent English colonies in Virginia and Massachusetts. As a young man, he experienced the growing tensions between King Charles I and Parliament that would eventually explode into civil war. The English Civil War of 1642-1651 divided families and communities across the realm, pitting those who supported royal authority against those who believed in parliamentary supremacy and religious reform. Thomas Franklin chose the parliamentary side during the Civil War, reflecting the strong Protestant convictions and anti-authoritarian sentiment that characterized the Franklin family. He witnessed the execution of King Charles I in 1649, an event that shocked the European world and demonstrated that even divinely appointed monarchs could be held accountable for their actions. During the Commonwealth period under Oliver Cromwell, Thomas benefited from policies that favored skilled craftsmen and Protestant dissenters, allowing him to expand his blacksmithing business and accumulate modest prosperity. However, The restoration of the monarchy in 1660 under Charles II brought renewed pressure on religious nonconformists and those who had supported the parliamentary cause. Thomas's son, John Franklin, born around 1630, grew up during the Civil War and Commonwealth periods, absorbing the radical Protestant ideas about individual conscience, limited government, and resistance to tyranny that would later influence American revolutionary thought. John witnessed the Great Fire of London in 1666, which destroyed much of the medieval city and led to its reconstruction under the architectural guidance of Christopher Wren. He also lived through the Plague of 1665, which killed nearly 100,000 Londoners and demonstrated the vulnerability of even the most prosperous societies to natural disasters. These experiences of social upheaval and reconstruction fostered a practical, adaptable worldview that emphasized self-reliance and community cooperation over deference to traditional authority. John Franklin married around 1655 and established himself as a successful blacksmith and small landowner in Ecton, where the family had lived for over a century. His prosperity reflected the growing opportunities available to skilled craftsmen in the post-Civil War economy, as agricultural improvements and expanding trade created demand for tools, hardware, and manufactured goods. However, John's strong Protestant convictions put him at odds with the restored Anglican establishment, which demanded conformity to the Book of Common Prayer and episcopal authority. The Act of Uniformity of 1662 required all ministers and school teachers to declare their unfeigned assent and consent to Anglican doctrine, forcing thousands of Presbyterian, Baptist, and Congregationalist clergy from their positions. The religious persecution intensified under the Test Act of 1673, which excluded non-Anglicans from most public offices, and reached its peak during the Popish plot hysteria of 1678-1681, when anti-Catholic paranoia led to the execution of dozens of innocent Catholics and the exclusion of James. Then the exclusion of 1670 was it instead. Oh, some more whoa. Duke of York from the succession. John Franklin's nonconformist beliefs made him a potential target of these persecutions, though his status as a prosperous craftsman and loyal Englishman provided some protection. Nevertheless, the family's religious convictions would eventually drive them to seek greater freedom in the New World colonies, where Protestant dissenters could worship according to their consciences without government interference. John's son, Josiah Franklin, born in 1657, would become Benjamin Franklin's father, and the family member responsible for bringing the Franklin name to America. Born during the later years of Oliver Cromwell's Commonwealth, Josiah grew up in a household where religious devotion, hard work, and intellectual curiosity were considered essential virtues. His early education included not only practical skills like reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also theological study and biblical. The restoration of royal authority in 1660 created an increasingly hostile environment for nonconformist families like the Franklins, who found their religious and political beliefs under constant scrutiny. The Glorious Revolution of 1688, which brought William of Orange and Mary to the English throne, provided temporary relief for Protestant dissenters by establishing parliamentary supremacy and religious toleration. However, economic opportunities in England remained limited for those outside the established church, and many nonconformist families began considering emigration to the American colonies, where religious freedom and economic advancement seemed more achievable. The Massachusetts Bay Colony, founded by Puritan settlers who shared similar theological convictions with the Franklins, offered particular attractions for English families seeking both spiritual liberty and material prosperity. In 1682, at the age of 25, Josiah Franklin made the momentous decision to emigrate to New England, leaving behind the family's ancestral home in Ecton and the blacksmith trade that had sustained them for generations. His timing coincided with a period of renewed religious persecution in England, as James II attempts to restore Catholicism created anxiety among Protestant families about their future security. Josiah arrived in Boston with his first wife and child, whom he had married in England, and immediately established himself as a tallow chandler and soap maker, trades that required both skill and capital but offered good prospects in the growing colonial economy. Boston in 1682 was a thriving port city of approximately 7,000 inhabitants, whose Puritan founders had created a society based on religious conviction, commercial enterprise, and communal responsibility. The city's economy depended on trade with England, the Caribbean, and other American colonies, while its intellectual life centered on Harvard College, founded in 1636 to train ministers and magistrates for the godly commonwealth. Josiah Franklin's decision to enter the candle and soap-making business reflected both practical necessity and religious conviction, as these products were essential for household use and religious observance in an era before gas lighting and commercial cleaning products. The candle-making trade required considerable technical expertise, as craftsmen had to understand the properties of different waxes and tallows, the proper temperature for dipping and molding, and the market preferences of various customer groups. Josiah's shop on Milk Street became a center of community activity, where customers gathered to exchange news, discuss politics, and debate religious questions while purchasing household necessities. His reputation for honest dealing and quality products gradually established him as a respected member of Boston's merchant community, though he never achieved the wealth or social prominence of the city's leading families. Josiah's first wife and child, Franklin, bore him 7 children between 1683 and 1696, but she died in 1689, leaving him a widower with young children to raise while managing a demanding business. In 1689, the same year as Anne's death, he married Abiah Folger, a young woman from Nantucket whose family represented another strain of New England Puritanism with its own distinctive characteristics. The Folger family had arrived in Massachusetts in 1635 as part of the Great Migration of Puritan settlers fleeing religious persecution in England, and they had established themselves as successful merchants and civic leaders in the island community of Nantucket. Abiah Folger was born in 1667, the daughter of Peter Folger, a Baptist minister, surveyor, and interpreter who had played a crucial role in the early development of Nantucket. Peter Folger's religious convictions differed significantly from mainstream Puritan orthodoxy, as he advocated for Baptist principles of adult baptism by immersion and complete separation of church and state. His 1676 poem, A Looking Glass for the Times, criticized the Massachusetts authorities for their persecution of Quakers and other religious dissenters, arguing that God was punishing New England for its intolerance through King Philip's War and other calamities. These independent religious views, combined with practical skills in surveying and trade, made Peter Folger a respected but somewhat controversial figure in Massachusetts society. The marriage between Josiah Franklin and Abiah Folger in 1689 united two families with similar religious convictions, but different regional backgrounds and economic experiences. Abiah brought to the marriage not only her father's intellectual independence and religious tolerance, but also connections to Nantucket's whaling and trading networks that would prove valuable for the Franklin family's commercial enterprises. Her strong personality and educational background complemented Josiah's practical business skills and steady temperament, creating a household environment that encouraged both material success and intellectual development. Between 1690 and 1713, Abiah bore Josiah 10 more children, bringing the total number of Franklin offspring to 17, though several died in infancy or childhood, as was common in the pre-modern era. The large family required careful financial management and domestic organization, particularly as Josiah's candle-making business faced increasing competition from other Boston craftsmen and imported products. Despite these challenges, the Franklin household maintained a reputation for hospitality, intellectual curiosity, and religious devotion that attracted visitors from throughout New England and beyond. Benjamin Franklin, the 15th of Josiah's 17 children and the 10th son born to Abiah, entered the world on January 17, 1706, according to the old-style calendar then used in the British colony. His birth occurred during a particularly harsh New England winter, when Boston Harbor froze solid and fuel shortages made heating expensive and difficult to obtain. The infant who would become one of America's greatest figures was born into a household where financial resources were stretched thin, but intellectual stimulation was abundant, as Josiah's customers and friends regularly gathered to discuss theology, politics, natural philosophy, and commercial affairs. The Boston of Benjamin's childhood was a city in transition, growing rapidly in population and commercial importance, while grappling with the social and political challenges created by its success. The population had reached nearly 12,000 by 1710, making it the largest city in British North America and a major center of trade with Europe, the Caribbean, and other American colonies. The city's prosperity attracted immigrants from throughout Europe and the British Isles, creating religious and ethnic diversity that challenged the original Puritan vision of a homogeneous godly community. The political landscape was equally complex, as Massachusetts struggled to balance loyalty to the British Crown with preservation of the self-governing traditions established by the original Puritan settlers. The revocation of the original Massachusetts Charter in 1684 and its replacement with a royal charter in 1691 had reduced colonial autonomy while increasing imperial oversight. These changes created ongoing tensions between appointed royal officials and elected colonial representatives that would eventually contribute to the revolutionary crisis of the 1760s and 1770s. Young Benjamin's earliest memories were shaped by the rhythms of his father's workshop, where the daily processes of candle-making provided both sensory experiences and practical lessons about chemistry, economics, and craftsmanship. The acrid smell of boiling tallow, the precise timing required for dipping operations, and the careful quality control needed to produce marketable products taught him to observe natural processes closely and think systematically about cause and effect relationships. These early experiences with practical chemistry would later inform his scientific investigations into electricity, heat transfer, and other natural phenomena. The Franklin household's intellectual atmosphere was enriched by Josiah's practice of inviting learned men to dinner conversations, where theological, political, and scientific questions were debated with vigor and sophistication. Benjamin later recalled that his father had an excellent voice and could accompany himself on the violin, and that these musical interludes provided relief from serious discussions while maintaining the family's reputation for cultured entertainment. The combination of practical work and intellectual discourse created an educational environment that encouraged both manual dexterity and mental agility. Despite the family's modest financial circumstances, Josiah initially intended Benjamin for the ministry, recognizing his youngest son's exceptional intelligence and verbal facility. At age 8, Benjamin was enrolled in the Boston Latin School, where he would have received the classical education in Latin, Greek, rhetoric, and theology required for admission to Harvard College, and eventual ordination as a minister. However, the financial burden of supporting such an extended education, combined with doubts about Benjamin's suitability for clerical life, led Josiah to withdraw him after only 2 years and transfer him to George Brownell's English school, which emphasized practical subjects like writing, arithmetic, and navigation. The change from classical to practical education reflected both economic necessity and Josiah's growing recognition that Benjamin's talents lay in secular rather than religious directions. At Brownell's school, Benjamin excelled in writing but struggled with arithmetic, a weakness that would persist throughout his life and influence his later preference for practical over theoretical approaches to mathematical problems. His exceptional skill in composition and debate marked him as a potential candidate for careers in law, journalism, or commerce rather than the ministry. At age 10, Benjamin's formal education ended when Josiah brought him into the candle-making business as an apprentice, hoping to prepare him for eventual succession to the family trade. However, Benjamin found the work tedious and physically demanding, and he began to express interest in more adventurous careers like seafaring, much to his father's alarm. Recognizing that his son's restless intelligence required more challenging outlets, Josiah began exploring alternative apprenticeship arrangements with other Boston craftsmen who might provide both practical training and intellectual stimulation. The solution came in 1718, when Josiah arranged for 12-year-old Benjamin to become an apprentice to his older brother James, who had recently established a printing business in Boston after learning the trade in London. The printing trade represented one of the most intellectually demanding crafts available in colonial America, requiring not only manual skills in typesetting and press operation, but also literacy, mathematical ability, and knowledge of current affairs. Printers served as the primary conduits of information and ideas in colonial society, producing newspapers, pamphlets, books, and government documents that shaped public opinion and political discourse. James Franklin had returned from London with the latest printing equipment and ambitious plans to compete with established Boston printers like Bartholomew Green and Samuel Neeland, who had dominated the local market for decades. His shop on Queen Street, later Court Street, was equipped with a wooden printing press, several fonts of type, and the various tools and supplies needed for book and pamphlet production. The indenture contract binding Benjamin to 9 years of service reflected the standard terms for colonial apprenticeships, which required the master to provide food, lodging, clothing, and training in exchange for the apprentice's labor and loyalty. The printing apprenticeship transformed Benjamin's life by exposing him to the world of books, ideas, and public discourse that would define his intellectual development for the next decade. Unlike his father's candle-making business, which served local household needs, the printing trade connected him to international networks of knowledge and communication that spanned the Atlantic world. Through his work-setting type for various publications, he encountered the writings of leading European thinkers like John Locke, Joseph Addison, and Alexander Pope, whose ideas about government, literature, and human nature profoundly influenced his developing worldview. Benjamin's exceptional intelligence and curiosity quickly made him an invaluable assistant in the printing shop, as he mastered not only the technical aspects of the trade, but also developed skills in writing, editing, and business management that exceeded those of most journeyman printers. His voracious reading habits, funded by the money he saved on meals by adopting a largely vegetarian diet, allowed him to study works of history, science, philosophy, and literature that were normally accessible only to university-educated gentlemen. This autodidactic education, combined with practical experience in the printing trade, created a unique intellectual foundation that blended theoretical knowledge with hands-on expertise. The relationship between Benjamin and James Franklin was complicated by their age difference, family dynamics, and competing ambitions within the printing business. James, 13 years older than Benjamin, had invested considerable time and money in establishing his shop, and expected both respect and obedience from his younger brother. However, Benjamin's superior intelligence and writing ability soon became apparent to customers and competitors alike, creating tensions that would eventually lead to a permanent break between the brothers. The crisis came in 1721, when James launched the New England Courant, the fourth newspaper established in the American colonies and the first to adopt the satirical, irreverent tone of contemporary London publications. The Courant's criticism of local authorities, particularly regarding smallpox inoculation policies, quickly attracted both readers and enemies among Boston's political and religious establishment. When the paper published articles questioning the wisdom of inoculation during a severe smallpox epidemic, it drew fierce opposition from Cotton Mather and other leading ministers who supported the controversial medical procedure. Benjamin contributed anonymous articles to the Courant under the pseudonym Silence Dogood, creating a fictional widow whose observations on Boston society combined humor, social criticism, and moral instruction in the style of Addison and Steele's Spectator papers. These essays, published between April and October 1722, demonstrated Benjamin's exceptional talent for satirical writing, while establishing his reputation as a keen observer of human nature and social institutions. The popularity of the do-good papers enhanced the Courant's circulation and influence, though few readers suspected that the sophisticated social commentary was written by a 16-year-old apprentice. The success of Benjamin's writing created new tensions with James, who resented his younger brother's growing reputation and began treating him with increased harshness and jealousy. The city's printing trade was dominated by Andrew Bradford, whose family had established the first newspaper in the Middle Colonies and maintained close connections with postal and government officials. However, Bradford's operation was relatively small and technically backward compared to the best London establishments, creating opportunities for competitors who could offer superior products and services. When Benjamin approached Bradford seeking employment, the older printer had no immediate openings, but suggested that he try Samuel Cummer, a recent immigrant from London who was attempting to establish a competing business. Cummer hired Benjamin as a journeyman printer, though his shop was poorly equipped and his own technical skills were limited. The arrangement provided Benjamin with steady employment and exposure to Philadelphia's commercial and intellectual communities. But it also revealed the inadequacies of colonial printing compared to European standards. Cummer's religious enthusiasm and erratic business practices created an unstable working environment that convinced Benjamin he needed better training and more sophisticated equipment to succeed in the printing trade. The opportunity for advancement came through Benjamin's acquaintance with Sir William Keith, the colonial governor of Pennsylvania, who was impressed by the young printer's intelligence and writing ability. Keith proposed that Benjamin travel to London to purchase printing equipment and establish connections with English suppliers, offering to provide letters of credit and introductions to facilitate the venture. The proposal appealed to Benjamin's ambition and curiosity about the larger world, though he was naive about both the costs involved and Keith's reliability as a business partner. In November 1724, 18-year-old Benjamin sailed for London aboard the ship London Hope, carrying what he believed were letters of credit from Governor Keith, but which proved to be worthless when he attempted to use them upon arrival. Stranded in London without funds or connections, he was forced to seek employment in the city's printing houses, while hoping to earn enough money to return to America. The experience of being deceived by Keith provided valuable lessons about the importance of written contracts and reliable business partners that would guide his future commercial dealings. London in 1724 was the largest city in Europe, with nearly 700,000 inhabitants and the most sophisticated printing industry in the world. Benjamin found employment first at Samuel Palmer's printing house in Bartholomew, Close, and later at John Watts's establishment in Lincoln's Inn Fields, where he learned advanced techniques in typesetting, presswork, and book production that were unavailable in the American colonies. His exceptional skills and work ethic quickly earned him respect from both employers and fellow workers, demonstrating that colonial craftsmen could compete successfully with their European counterparts when given proper training and equipment. The 18 months Benjamin spent in London exposed him to intellectual currents and cultural influences that profoundly shaped his developing worldview. He attended lectures at the Royal Society, visited coffee houses where writers and scientists gathered to exchange ideas, and read extensively in philosophy, science, and literature while working to support himself. His pamphlet, A Dissertation on Liberty and Necessity, Pleasure and Pain, written in 1725, demonstrated his engagement with contemporary debates about free will, moral responsibility, and human nature that occupied leading European thinkers. The London experience also introduced Benjamin to the moral temptations and social opportunities available to young men in a cosmopolitan environment. His editorials and essays addressed topics ranging from local politics to international affairs, always with the wit and wisdom that made complex issues understandable to ordinary citizens. The paper's advertising columns provided valuable services to Philadelphia's merchants and craftsmen, while generating revenue that allowed Benjamin to invest in other business ventures and public improvements. In 1730, Benjamin married Deborah Red Rogers, his former landlord's daughter, in a common-law ceremony that avoided legal complications arising from her previous marriage to John Rogers, who had abandoned her and disappeared. Their union, though legally irregular, proved personally and professionally successful, as Deborah provided both domestic stability and practical assistance in managing the printing business. Her work managing the shop's retail operations and customer relations freed Benjamin to focus on writing, editing, and strategic planning that drove the business's continued growth. The early 1730s marked Benjamin's emergence as a public figure whose influence extended far beyond the printing trade. His founding of the Junto, a club for mutual improvement and civic discussion, created a forum where Philadelphia's ambitious young men could exchange ideas and coordinate efforts to improve their city. The Junto's activities included debates on philosophical and political questions, collaborative business ventures, and public service projects that enhanced both individual members' careers and the community's welfare. This model of voluntary association for public good would later influence Benjamin's approach to both scientific research and political organization. Benjamin's scientific interests began to develop seriously during the 1740s, when he encountered European writings on electrical phenomena and began conducting his own experiments with Leyden jars and other electrical apparatus. His systematic approach to investigating electrical behavior combined careful observation with theoretical speculation, leading to insights about positive and negative charges, electrical conduction, and the relationship between laboratory electricity and atmospheric lightning. These investigations culminated in the famous kite experiment of 1752, which demonstrated his hypothesis that lightning and laboratory sparks were manifestations of the same electrical force. The scientific work brought Benjamin international recognition as one of the leading natural philosophers of his era, with election to the Royal Society of London and correspondence with prominent European scientists like Buffon, Euler, and Priestley. His experiments and observations on electricity, published in 1751, established new theoretical frameworks for understanding electrical phenomena while describing practical applications like lightning rods that could protect buildings and ships from electrical damage. This combination of theoretical insight and practical application exemplified Benjamin's approach to scientific investigation throughout his career. The success of his printing business and growing scientific reputation provided Benjamin with the financial independence and social standing necessary for increased involvement in public affairs. His election to the Pennsylvania Assembly in 1751 marked the beginning of a political career that would span nearly 4 decades and encompass service at the colonial, imperial, and national levels. His early political work focused on practical issues like street lighting, fire protection, and postal service improvement that demonstrated the government's potential to enhance citizens' daily lives through well-designed institutions and efficient administration. Benjamin's appointment as Deputy Postmaster General for the American colonies in 1753 reflected both his proven administrative abilities and his understanding of communication networks that connected distant communities. His reforms of postal operations improved service reliability while reducing costs, demonstrating that American institutions could achieve European standards of efficiency when properly managed. The position also provided him with extensive knowledge of intercolonial affairs and personal connections that would prove invaluable during the revolutionary crisis of the 1760s and 1770s. The Albany Congress of 1754, where Benjamin proposed his plan of union for coordinating colonial defense against French expansion, marked his emergence as a continental rather than merely provincial leader. Although the plan was rejected by both colonial assemblies and imperial authorities, it demonstrated his early recognition that American interests required greater unity and coordination than existing institutions provided. His advocacy for intercolonial cooperation reflected both practical military necessity and philosophical conviction that voluntary associations could achieve goals impossible for individuals or isolated communities acting alone. Benjamin's mission to England from 1757 to 1775 as Pennsylvania's colonial agent provided him with first-hand experience of imperial politics and British society that profoundly influenced his evolving views on American independence. Initially hopeful that reasonable discussion could resolve conflicts between colonial and imperial interests, he gradually became convinced that fundamental differences in values and objectives made accommodation impossible. His transformation from loyal British subject seeking reform to American patriot advocating independence reflected not personal ambition, but careful analysis of political realities and moral principles. The scientific work continued during his London years, with investigations into heat transfer, oil's effect on water surfaces, and the relationship between color and temperature that added to his international reputation. His election as president of the American Philosophical Society in 1769 recognized his leadership in promoting scientific research and international scholarly cooperation. The combination of scientific achievement and political experience made him uniquely qualified to represent American interests in European diplomatic circles during the Revolutionary Crisis. Benjamin's return to Philadelphia in May 1775, just weeks after the battles of Lexington and Concord, marked his full commitment to the American cause despite his advanced age and preference for compromise over confrontation. His election to the Continental Congress and appointment to the committee, drafting the Declaration of Independence, demonstrated his colleagues' recognition of his unique qualifications for managing the transition from British subjects to independent Americans. His editorial contributions to Jefferson's draft reflected both his literary skills and his understanding of the document's intended audiences in America, Europe, and posterity. The diplomatic mission to France from 1778 to 1785 represented perhaps Benjamin's greatest service to his country, as his negotiation of the French alliance provided the military and financial support necessary for American victory in the Revolutionary War. His popularity among French intellectuals and aristocrats, who viewed him as the embodiment of American simplicity and natural wisdom, facilitated diplomatic negotiations that might have failed with a more conventional representative. His careful cultivation of his public image as a simple American philosopher demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of how personal diplomacy could achieve political objectives impossible through formal negotiations alone. The final phase of Benjamin's public career, including his participation in the Constitutional Convention of 1787, demonstrated his continued commitment to Republican government and institutional innovation despite his failing health and advanced age. His advocacy for compromise between large and small state interests reflected both practical political wisdom and philosophical conviction that successful government required balancing competing claims through reasoned discussion rather than force. His final public act, a petition to Congress calling for the abolition of slavery, demonstrated that his commitment to human dignity and natural rights remained strong even as his physical powers declined. Benjamin Franklin died on April 17, 1790, at the age of 84, having lived long enough to see the new American nation established on foundations that owed much to his scientific, literary, and political contributions. His funeral in Philadelphia attracted over 20,000 mourners, while memorial services in European capitals recognized his international significance as both scientist and statesman. The range of his achievements in printing, writing, science, invention, diplomacy, and statecraft established him as perhaps the most complete genius America has produced, whose example continues to inspire those who believe that individual talent and determination can overcome obstacles and achieve extraordinary things. The bloodline that produced Benjamin Franklin, tracing back through generations of English craftsmen and religious dissenters, culminated in an individual whose achievements transcended all previous family accomplishments, while remaining grounded in the practical wisdom and moral convictions of his ancestors. His transformation from a candlemaker's son to an international figure of science and diplomacy demonstrated the democratic potential inherent in American society, where merit rather than birth determined individual success and contribution to the common good. His life story remains one of history's most compelling examples of how extraordinary achievement can emerge from ordinary beginnings when talent combines with opportunity, education, and unwavering commitment to human improvement and social progress.